This is Bruce B. Geibel, Civil Engineer Corps, United States Navy. I retired as a captain in September 1991. I was with the Navy Seabees in Vietnam, the Naval Mobile Construction Battalion 11, and I was there in three different tours with the battalion. Started out with them in training in Fort Miami, California. And on the 26th of June, 1966, I departed Port Miami for Vietnam. The battalion was already overseas in Da Nang, East Vietnam, in 1966. We came back home from that deployment in October, November timeframe of that year. I deployed a second tour in 1967 as officer in charge of CB Team 1109, part of Naval Mobile Construction Battalion 11, and we were stationed in Ching Kam, Thailand, where I was working with a 13-man CB team, working with the Thai Border Patrol Police. I returned from that tour in November of that year, having deployed over there to Thailand in April of that year. I went back to Vietnam with the battalion a third time in Quang Tri, Vietnam, and that was I was there from April to September of 1966. Left Vietnam. I was offered a full Navy, be U.S. Navy rather than Reserve at that time, and that began the rest of my active duty career.
Perfect. And for listeners who don't know what a Seabee is, how do you explain it to people? Like, what's your elevator pitch for what the Seabees do?
That's an interesting question. I have a lot of people ask me that question. I guess the simplest thing that I can say is, and might be understood by other members of the military forces, is what is a CB? And this is described by CB, very simplistic. CB is a soldier in a sailor's uniform with Marine training, doing civilians work at WPA, that's wages, and that was government wages back in those days in 1942. As the CB song kind of describes a little bit more about the CBs, and we go back to December the 7th, 1941, when Pearl Harbor was attacked, and the CB song has in it, "We promise we'll remember the 7th of December with the CBs of the Navy, Bees of the Seven Seas." Those are words by Sam M. Lee and music by Peter DeRose, but that kind of describes what a CB is. CBs are the Naval Construction Force. CBs comes from the initials Construction Battalion, CV. A guy turned that into a C like SCA, being at sea, and bees, because we're always kind of like busy as bees. So that word, the acronym CBs, came from. And a CB does all kind of construction. We do it for the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, and the Marines, sometimes the Coast Guard. We do it overseas. During World War II, the CBs did work for the Marines, primarily in the South Pacific on islands out there. They also did work with other armed forces, including the U.S. Army on D-Day and liberation of several of the countries over there, and marching across the Rhine River. We set up pontoon bridges across the Rhine River there so the Army folks could take their tanks across into Germany from Luxembourg. So that's a little bit about what the CBs are.
Yeah, building and fighting.
Yes. Purpose of CBs is, and we go back to the Latin definition, construimus batuimus. We build, we fight. And they are known for their purpose and dedication work, which we say we can do. And everybody says CBs can do because we always did. And now we've added to that has done and done did. This frequent miraculous occurrence is kind of recognized in the form of a well done. And when we get our work done, we get that well done from above our chain of command and down through the ranks. So that's a little bit more about the Seabees.
Bruce, what kinds of skills do the Seabees collectively kind of represent? What kinds of building skills in particular? I know plumbers, electricians, steel workers. What else?
Yes, we going back to World War II. There were a bunch of civilians doing construction work all over the South Pacific at all the islands out there. You know, from Guam to Philippines, Wake, those islands out there. But civilians were unarmed, and they didn't have any way to protect themselves. When the Japanese came ashore, they took them as prisoners of war. Many of them they executed or shot or were killed when they invaded the islands out there. And so the U.S. Navy began to recognize the need for armed construction people out there to continue to do work, because it was felt like that the Seabees construction contractors were there and they offered any resistance at all, they would be considered a threat to the invading force, and they would probably be just shot right on sight there. So I think the Navy recognized they needed people to do that work, but yet be armed to be able to protect the site. So that's where we say we build, we also fight. We need to fight to be able to protect those things. Now, the Seabees themselves come from ratings, the Group 8 ratings. Yeah, Seabees are construction personnel. They come from the Navy's Group 8 ratings, and the ratings include steel workers, builders, equipment operators, construction mechanics, construction electricians, engineering aides, and utilities men. So they come from all the different types of building trades.
Mm-hmm. And that motto, "We build, we fight," is represented by the mascot of the Seabees. Can you describe that?
Yeah, the CB mascot is kind of built like a bee. You have the arm appendages there. One holds a hammer, the other one holds a Tommy gun at the front, and they have a CB rate on the side to show they're part of a military organization. But the hammer basically implying we build, the Tommy gun at the front indicating we fight. So not only do we build things, but we're there capable of defending the sites that we build.
Yeah. So let's break that down a little bit. Let's start with building. Can you give some examples of the kinds of things that Seabees would have been building in Vietnam?
Seabees do vertical work, which is building buildings and facilities that go in the air, and they do horizontal work, and that will be road work along the plane of the ground there. So we do that type of thing. But the things we would build would include things like roads and bridges, piers, wharves, hospitals. We would do chapels for religious things. We build barracks to be able to house the military troops. We build dining halls and galleys to feed them. We build storage facilities and warehouses to house the materials, the construction materials, and even the foods that we eat in warehouses. We do simple things like build a movie screen so you can show a movie, or build an amphitheater so they can have an outdoor movie theater amphitheater there with maybe a USO show come in to do a show on the stage here. We can do observation towers where they can put platforms up in the air, steel or wood up maybe 20 foot in the air, so that they can look out fields of fire and be able to see any oncoming enemy forces. We also build ammunition supply points where we can bury our ammunition between bunkers and down in holes there to protect it from getting hit. They build helicopter pads. A lot of the work we did out there, we had to go to remote sites, and the only way to get out to some of these where the Army and the Marines were was to go out by helicopter. So we built helicopter pads and protect it so they could come in, pick up supplies, and Seabees to take them out to these work sites to do the construction out there. We built petroleum, oil, and lubrication tanks, great big tanks, 10,000 barrel tanks. We could build showers and bathroom facilities, all types of related infrastructure. And besides that, we worked with the local villagers in many, many villages, and we did civic action work for them. We could help them hand dig wells. We could help them plow things up to be able to make a garden. We could help them build a dispensary to be able to take care of their sick and ill. And we could help them build a schoolhouse so they could train their kids. We could help them build roads out to the village so the villagers could take their wares, maybe vegetables they wanted to sell or things they made out to the local village and be able to sell it to make money to buy things there to take back to the village. So we did all kinds of things like that for both the villagers and military units we supported.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, basically anything required for victory that wasn't already there, the Seabees built.
Absolutely. And if things were there, maybe damaged or destroyed or built up, we would help them rebuild those facilities and infrastructure so they could work again.
Yeah. So let's talk about the fighting side. My understanding is that, Seabees saw a lot of action, but most of that probably would have been defending the areas where they were trying to work if that area was under attack. Is that fair to say?
That is correct. During World War II, the Seabees constructed more than 400 advanced bases, and some of those could accommodate up to 50,000 men, and housing people maybe up to 1.5 million people, both in the South Pacific and in Europe. We built air bases, shipyards, port facilities, floating dry docks, etc. In the Pacific Theater, the Seabees worked with the Marines out there primarily. Marines pretty much had Western Pacific and places like Iwo Jima, the Philippines, Guam, and Okinawa. Major battles, of course, in Iwo Jima with the Marines there. And the Seabees went ashore with the Marines on the first landing there. And once they established the beachhead there, the Seabees would go out and try to help rebuild airfields that once belonged to the Japanese so that American forces could land people there. In the Atlantic theater of operations, the Seabees were there. Some of the underwater demolition people and the divers there would come in and help establish the beach landings on D-Day for the Army folks and the Navy folks that come ashore there. I also participated in Luxembourg. Also helped the Army. We built pontoon bridges across the Rhine River there to help the Army take the tanks across when they invaded into Germany there. So that's some of the things that the Seabees did during World War II.
Well, let's shift gears a little bit and talk about you, unless there's anything else you want to add about the Seabees.
I think we could go to Vietnam a little bit about the Seabees there. So a Seabee battalion basically is the principal organization of the Seabees, and that could include, Civil Engineer Corps officers. Civil Engineer Corps officers were the officers in charge. They would be engineers, electrical engineers, mechanical engineers, civil engineers, or they could be architects, or they could be building contractors. And they would run the Seabee battalion, which would consist of 5 companies. You have Alpha Company. Alpha Company were the equipment operators and the construction mechanics. They did the vertical work, the road work, the bridges, and that type of thing. Then you'd have a headquarters company, which would consist of an administration department, security and training, operations, and supply depot. Each of those departments would do different things for the battalion. There were also other departments, a medical department and a dental department. Also, you had a chaplain and a Seabee battalion. So that's how the work was done. The basic construction companies were Bravo, Charlie, and Delta companies. Bravo company would, of course, be your steel workers, your electricians, your utilities men. Charlie and Delta would be the actual construction companies, do vertical construction like buildings and infrastructure and utilities. and those observation towers, and they would have the electricians and the utilities men come in to provide the electrical systems and the utility systems there. So that's basically the footprint of the Seabees as they did work in Vietnam and up to this time.
Mm. Yeah, I guess before we shift gears into your experience, I guess one last question about Seabees, and this is, particularly for Vietnam. Can you describe what kind of training a CB would have? Because obviously you got to be trained to build and you got to be trained to fight. So how do you get somebody ready for that job?
Interesting enough, during World War II, they had to go out and get the Seabees, basically bring them in from the various construction trades there. And these are all people, many of them had been in the construction trade for 10, 15, 20 years or more. The average age of the construction people they brought in to do that type of work during World War II was 37 years old. They had wealth of experience there. So all we needed to do is bring them in and maybe emphasize military training duties, teach them how to use a rifle, teach them how to wear the uniform, teach them how to wear protective gear, teach them how to go through a canister place where you throw canisters in there with the smoke and stuff, and with them with masks on, they'd be able to have to work their way through that. We teach them how to fight fires, because if you're in a construction zone overseas, you're going to get hit by bombs, missiles, mortars and stuff, and going to catch on fire. So they teach them how to put fires out. And they would take them to a rifle range, teach them how to use a pistol and a rifle, or maybe some machine gun, teach them how to protect themselves, do a little bit of hand-to-hand combat. Now, during Vietnam, you had CB battalions out there already, and they had all those skills in there. But during Vietnam, we would deploy overseas in Vietnam for about 7.5 to 8 months. We would come back to the States to resupply our weapons and ammunition, also to bring in new people to replace those that were leaving the battalion at that time. And then we'd put everybody through military training, and they'd go from 2 to 4 weeks. We would end up with a field exercise at Camp Pendleton. For those of us in Fort Hueneme, you'd go down there for 2 weeks and work with the Marines, and you would go out on the firing ranges and shoot all kinds of weapons, throw grenades, and teach you how to use your weapon, an M1 or an M16 rifle or a 45 pistol, teach them how to use a machine gun, and those are the types of things. But also during the home port period, when you brought back people, they would need to enhance their skills, because lots of times there were new ways to do construction. We would teach or send various people to construction classes all over the USA. If it was an automotive thing, we may send them to their Chrysler plant to be able to maintain some of the equipment there, or send them somewhere where they had heavy equipment like Caterpillar to learn how to operate some of the new equipment there. Other places there may be new skills available in builders or new materials, so we'd send people out off base to go to places to learn about the new materials and skills. And then we would have on-job training right there at the base, where we would put them in a barracks, say, to do some maintenance there, to teach them how to do maintenance, painting, plumbing, electrical stuff. So we did a lot of work on the base there with them. And we also set up an example of a military post in our home port. You would teach them how to dig, show them how to dig a well, construct a small building, put electricians up on a tower, how they would do electrical work up on a tower. And so you show the visitors that would come aboard the base, the civilians there to come aboard to look at things going on, show them what we were actually doing in Vietnam. So I think there was a vast amount of training skills in home port, as well as military training to enable the battalion to redeploy overseas for a second, third, or even fourth time.
Yeah, I never thought about that. I mean, you have your construction or building skills when you get there, but the profession is not standing still, right? I mean, that the profession continues to advance, and so your skills are not something that are acquired and then that's it, right? I mean, you have to constantly be updating them as technology advances.
In a military organization, the one important thing is when you do that training is you teach teamwork. You always have a person in charge, like charge of a 4 or 6 man squad, or maybe a 20 or 30 man platoon, or maybe 120 or 200 and something man uh, company within the battalion. Battalion usually held in Vietnam about 738 people on active duty there in the battalion, with 24 officers and about 760 so enlisted. During World War II, you'd have 32 officers in a battalion and maybe up to 1,000 or 1,100 people in a battalion, a little bit bigger organization back in those days. But it's all about teamwork, being able to work together, being able to do construction, have your weapons nearby, so if you came under attack, you could get on a foxhole and be prepared to defend that position. It was about teamwork. It wasn't about one person doing one thing. It was about 6 people working together to have overwhelming construction support, as well as overwhelming defense against people who may be attacking you there. Teamwork.
Yeah. Just a little side question. It's just for my own curiosity. You know, we've mentioned electricians a bunch of times, and it just occurred to me that electrical power has to come from somewhere. Would Seabees build those, I don't know, power plants or transfer stations or
Yes,
anything
we
like
did.
that? Wow.
Absolutely, we did that. We had generators. Sometimes we used local power, but you always needed a backup generator because a lot of times the local power got taken out by the Viet Cong or the enemy forces there. So we had generators backed up, especially in places like your hospitals or your dispensaries, your command posts, the central management systems, and so forth. So you had generator power there to back that up. So we had 2 ways of doing power there: local and generator.
Yeah, when you say local, I mean, there must have been a lot of places in Vietnam at that time that didn't have any electricity. And so if the military needed it, they'd have to they'd have to create it somehow, right?
Yeah, we built power plants over there. We had the fuel facilities, and we could build the power plants as well, small ones. But most of it was multi-generator backup. But there's places like Da Nang, Saigon, and other areas, you had local power in town there, but that wasn't always sufficient. So that's why you had the backup generator power there as well. But yeah, the Seabees can build almost anything.
Wow. And fight while they're doing it.
And fight when they have to.
So let's talk about you a little bit. How is it that you came to be in the military? And then what was the path for you to becoming a Seabee?
My dad was a medical officer during World War II. He was on active duty from 1937 to 1948 time frame. He deployed to the Philippines with a medical unit and ran a hospital over there. But his hospital was located within the campsite of the 91st Naval Construction Battalion, the Seabee Battalion. The Seabees built his dispensary, as they called it back in those days, with Quonset huts. And because that was a basic building material that came out of Davisville, Rhode Island, the Quonset huts, steel containers. And he used to talk about that when he came home. And he showed me pictures of the Quonset huts and the Seabees there. And one big picture I remember just vividly in my mind, I have a picture of it hanging on my wall, is a picture of him and his medical staff in their uniforms, all pretty much khaki uniforms, and the Seabees all in their CB green, standing in there in one big picture. In August 1945, during VJ Day, the Japanese had declared they were out of it, war over. So they were celebrating that day, and that's the one picture I remember of him sending me. He sent me a picture of him in his military uniform, standing in front of a Jeep. It had senior medical officer on it. We talked about the Seabees quite a bit. I went to Clemson University starting in 1960, and it was still an A&M college at that time in South Carolina. And they had Air Force or Army ROTC. So I joined the Air Force Reserve unit there, and we did marching every week. And I was in uniform there, wore a hat a lot of the times as well. In 1962, they reverted from an A&M college to just a regular Clemson college at that time, and they stopped making mandatory you to attend ROTC. So I got out of the ROTC unit there. I had 2 guys in my architecture class. I was going through a 5-year architectural program from 1962 One of them had been a Seabee and one of them had been an officer, and they convinced me to join the Navy Seabee unit in Greenville, South Carolina, because that's where they were members of after they come off active duty. So they took me down. I signed up and joined the Seabee Reserves there in Unit 6-3 out of Greenville, South Carolina. Well, I was in there for 3 years in the reserves. I did my boot camp at Great Lakes. I was up at Davisville, Rhode Island with a Seabee battalion there, the Naval Construction Battalion 6 at the time, Reserve Battalion. I did 2 weeks duty with them. I graduated from Clemson in May of 65. I attended, they sent me to Naval Officer Canada School in Rhode Island, and I went and left there in October. I graduated from the Officer Canada School as an ensign in the U.S. Naval Reserve in March 1966. I went to 2 months of additional Civil Engineer Corps training. I became a Navy Civil Engineer Corps officer in the Navy Reserve with the 2 months training in Fort Menemee. And they said in middle of June, where would you like to go to duty? And I said, Seabees, Vietnam. It didn't take them long to say, gotcha, that's where you're going. And the next day they told me I was going to Navy Mobile Construction Battalion 11. So I joined 11 in Da Nang, Vietnam in June of 1966. So that was my first tour over there. And that's how I got involved in the Seabees. I did 2 years and 4 months with the Seabees there. I was offered a regular commission on active duty, and I left there in September of '68 and started another 24 years in the Navy. So I completed 26 years active duty, 3 years reserve duty, 2 years ROTC, and I had a total of 31 years in the military between the Air Force and the Navy.
Man, I'm curious, when they asked you what you wanted to do and you said Seabees Vietnam, what was driving that desire to be in that place at
Well,
that
it was
time?
inevitable that the draft. It was inevitable that the draft was on, and people were getting drafted to go to Vietnam anyway. Here I was active duty, and I said, I'm ready to go. I just finished about 6 weeks of CB training out there, and had gone through 2 weeks down in Camp Lejeune with the Marines there, and I was ready to go. I was fresh, and I said, why waste a couple of years going somewhere else? Why not go straight out there? This is what I've been trained to do. So that's why I said Seabees Vietnam. I was in my green when I said that.
So you arrived in Vietnam, remind me, when exactly?
June of 1966.
And what do you remember
I was in
about?
Yeah, I was in Nang East. It was out along the China Sea there.
Yeah. Well, first of all, how did you get there? And secondly, what do you remember about arriving there? What first impressions?
I left Port Hueneme, went down to LA, took a flight up to San Francisco. I went over to the Travis Air Force Base. And from there, I took a C-141 flight, went through Hawaii. I think I went through Wake Island, ended up in the Philippines. In the Philippines, I was transferred over to a C-130 Air Force plane with a bunch of other guys. We flew from the Philippines, Cuba Point, into Da Nang, Vietnam. When I arrived in Da Nang, I was picked up by people from my battalion, and they took me over to my CB camp that was across the river from Da Nang and Da Nang East, right along China Beach there. So that's how I ended up in Vietnam. My memories, sewage flowed through the streets, so you could smell the smell. We came through Old Dog Patch, which had recently rained, and the streets were wet, and the mud was flying off the vehicles all over us and into the people standing along the side. I can remember just how hot and humid it was. You know, I'd gone from probably temperatures in June, maybe in the 70s, 80s in California, and here it was 90s, soon to be hundreds in Vietnam. And by the time I got from the airport to my CB camp, I was soaking, sopping wet. my hat on my head was wet. Sweat was pouring down my brows onto my uniform, and I said, "What the heck am I doing here?" And that's how I started.
So you spent a long time in Vietnam.
I
without
just spent
getting,
a total of 16 months in Vietnam out of the 26 months I was in the battalion. Actually,
yeah,
I did a tour in Thailand in the middle of that. I did Vietnam first. I did Thailand with a CB team 1109 for about 7 months. Came back for 2 weeks to Vietnam when they were up in Dong Ha. They sent me back on the advanced party. Then I went back to Vietnam, to Quang Tri on my third tour over in Southeast Asia in 1968. So most Seabees at that time were making 2, 3, and some of them even 4 tours back to back to back to back between their home port in Vietnam, and some of them went to Thailand with their own CB teams.
so you were up near the DMZ.
Yeah, right. Right up on the DMZ when I was in Dong Ha and Quang Tri. Da Nang was down a couple hundred miles below the DMZ.
Yeah, and what exactly was your job there?
My job first tour in Vietnam in Da Nang, I was the assistant operations officer. I was in charge of surveying, design, drafting, and making sure that the projects that we were working on had the right plans and specifications to do the job. Then I would go out and inspect my surveying work and inspect the plans and specifications. Also designed an R&R center there for the 3rd Marine Force there, and it consisted of about 8 barracks for enlisted personnel and 1 barracks for officer personnel. It also had a chapel and a reading room there. It also had a 320-man amphitheater with a movie screen and a dressing room so they could have USO shows there. We worked on a mess hall there and some safety facilities as well as recreation facilities right there sitting on the China Beach. My second tour, I was officer in charge of a Navy CB team, 13-man CB team working over in Thailand with the Thai Border Patrol Police right on the border of Thailand and Laos. Our job was to help the Border Patrol Police get roads out to the border to keep the enemy from coming across Laos into Thailand there. We helped them build airfields. We helped them do medical things. We helped them do civic action work in local villages to teach both the Thai Border Patrol Police and local villages how to build and maintain their facilities. So we did wells, roadworks, and also airfields, helicopter landing pads and stuff for the Thai Border Patrol Police. My third tour there, I was an assistant company commander in Delta Company doing construction. Another officer came in. They wanted to put that officer in as the assistant company commander, so I moved over to be a special projects in our Alpha Company. And from there, I oversaw road work from Dong Ha down to Quang Tri. Oversaw a rock offload plant where we brought barge rock in from Da Nang by barge up a river to Dong Ha. They crushed the rock there, and we made it available for concrete and asphalt materials to be able to pave the roads and the asphalt to take care of some of the small roads that went into our camps there. Concrete, of course, to make concrete for building construction, and also some of the revetments we had there. So I got involved in quite a bit of what a battalion does during my 3 tours in Southeast Asia with NMCB 11.
Yeah, that third tour sounds like, kind of it sounds different than the first 2, just in terms of the potential danger. I mean, if you're between Dong Ha and Quang Tri.
There was a lot more danger up there being on the road work every day, sorting things out. And we got hit a couple times our camp, but minor stuff. We were not in it the thick of it like the Marines and the Army grunts were out there who were in it every day. we got hit every now and then in secondary attacks when they were going after some other uh, uh, location there, and we just happened to be between them, the enemy, and that location. So yeah, we got hit quite a bit, but not as bad as the poor grunts in the field.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you and I, when we talked yesterday, I looked it up, and according to Navy Times, there are 85 Seabees on the wall. I'm wondering, have you ever visited the Vietnam Veterans Memorial in DC?
I've been there about 5 or 6 times. It's a solemn experience. Believe me, they you know there are 8 Seabees names on the wall there from my own battalion who were killed in Vietnam. So we lost 8 Seabees whose names are on the wall. We had another 5 Seabees and our dentist who died of accidental causes in Vietnam through incidents not related to any enemy action. But yeah, it was quite a time during Vietnam service. There were something like 26,000 Seabees in Vietnam. Killed in action, usually 85 or so, 86. And the average age of the Seabees over there was 19 and a half years old compared to 37 of the Seabees in World War II.
Man, that's a dramatic difference. That's almost half.
True.
When
26,000. Yeah.
I'm sorry, you go ahead.
Yeah, 26,000 Seabees of those 86 were killed in action, and I think it's 300 or so or more were injured in action over there. Interesting, during World War II, there were 321,000 Seabees there. 300 were killed in action. Another 500 Seabees died on the job site. Iwo Jima alone, the Seabees of the 133rd Naval Construction Battalion, of which 875 Seabees went ashore with the Marines initially. 42 of those Seabees were killed in action, and 370 of the Seabees that were there with 133rd Battalion were wounded in action. So it was, yeah, the Seabees were right there with them in the thick of it in a lot of those actions, both during World War II, in Korea, and Vietnam, and all the wars after Vietnam.
Bruce, when you visit the wall, are there any particular names that you look for?
One was a Seabee that worked on my Seabee team, Charles Jones. He was on my Seabee team in Thailand. He went back to join our battalion, and then later on he came back with another battalion, Naval Mobile Construction Battalion 5, on a follow-on tour. Not unlikely for Seabees to go back to Vietnam many times. He stepped on a mine, was injured with that battalion in I think it was 1969. He was injured, and 5 days later he died from his wounds there, and his name is on the wall. And interestingly enough, I was working on a project after I got out of the Navy out of Little Rock, Arkansas. I got a call from his son while I was over there. His son was about 2 or 3 months old when his daddy was killed in Vietnam. And he said, "I'm living here in Little Rock." He says, "I understand you are here." He said, "I'd like a chance to talk to you and find out a little bit about my dad, because I really never saw any pictures and didn't know anything about him." So 2 days later, I gathered up some pictures of his dad, and I met him in a little restaurant in town in Little Rock, and said, "Fire away with your questions. You ever have any pictures of my dad?" And I pulled up about 3 or 4 of his dad. And he got tears in his eyes and looked at him. He said, "Tell me a little bit about what he did." I said, "Well, he was a steel worker in the battalion. He was a steel worker and the only still worker on my Seabee team in Thailand. And I told him about all the work we'd done in Thailand and in Vietnam, and a little bit about the kind of guy he was. And I said he was a hero amongst the Seabees, and did his job proficiently and effectively. And by this time, he and I both had tears in our eyes, just from the talking about it, remembering that. And he appreciated very much hearing about his dad. And he said, I never really knew anything about him because Mom didn't tell me much, because he never really said too much when he came home with her about what the Seabees did over there. So that's a little bit of the one guy I always look for when I go on the wall there.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about your book. Can you just first tell our listeners the name of your book and where they can find it?
My book, it's called The Family of the 11th Seabee Battalions, and it's kind of a mix of the old World War II group back in those days. They were called Navy Construction Battalions. By the time they got to Korea and Vietnam, the name had changed to Navy Mobile Construction Battalions, because that's what they were known for, being mobile and being able to go anywhere at any time on 24 or 48 hours notice all around the world. So that's kind of what it was about. And I said, are these battalions related? They said, well, technically they are, but according to our records, not really. So that's why I kind of kept them separated. So I wrote a book. I might just say I got information to process a book that was about 442 pages long. It includes notes from probably 150 Seabees that I talked with on the telephone and or communicated back and forth on email when I wrote the book back in September of 2005. And I got a lot of information from them. I got a lot of pictures from those Seabees. So my book includes a history of the Seabees, and then I get into a direct number of pages there, chapters on my battalion that I was in, the Navy Mobile Construction Battalion 11. It includes the awards they won. It includes the work they did. It includes the various companies, the commanding officers, the officers in charge, a little history of each of the Navy Seabee teams that we sent both to Vietnam and Thailand out of our battalion. And it has a list of all the names of it was close to 10,000 Seabees, 9,000 some odd thousand Seabees that were in this particular battalion from World War II, actually 1945, until they were decommissioned at the end of World War II in 1945, and then recommissioned again during the Korean War. Although the battalion didn't go to Korea, they were sent to the Philippines to work a couple of years on refitting some of the bases in the Philippines to build a huge Navy facility down there, including an airfield and a naval station to be able to support the Navy out there, and a number of things that we saw coming up in the Pacific. And then, of course, Vietnam came along. And so it proved a good use of those facilities there, because that was used as a throughput for most of the people and the things that came through the Vietnam stopover in the Philippines, and then shuttle it into Vietnam from there, either there or Japan. So that's kind of the story of it. But the book is no longer available. It's sold out, and the cost to reproduce it was exorbitant, and I couldn't afford then to sell it to the Seabees, because I was able to do this. I self-wrote it, self-structured it, self-published it, and was able to keep the cost of the Seabees of between $15 and $25, depending on when they bought it. But it's sold out now, so it's no longer available. But you can find it in probably the libraries in Port Hueneme, Gulfport, and some of the other areas there have that book published in there. NAFAC has a copy of it, and some of the other places have copies of it as well.
Is there anything that we haven't talked about regarding the Seabees or your experience in Vietnam that you think is important for our listeners to understand?
I think one thing that I'd like to call everybody's attention, and anybody in the Seabees now would know the name Marvin Shields. Um, he was a CB on CB team 1104 that was deployed to Vietnam out of our battalion and of CB 11 back in 1965, and uh, he was a hero in that battalion. He was the first and only Medal of Honor winner. Although he got it posthumously, he won the Medal of Honor for his heroic actions there with a Navy, with an Army Green Beret first lieutenant who was acting in charge of a Green Beret team that the CB team 1104 was working with, and uh, what they did was just amazing. And the lieutenant with the Green Berets also won the Medal of Honor, but he got his from a president. The wife got Marvin Shields posthumously there from the president of Washington, D.C. back in 1966.
Yeah. Um, one last question. It's just a matter of clarification for me, and forgive my ignorance about this, but in Vietnam, if it was horizontal, a road or a bridge, if it was vertical, the Seabees built it. Is that fair to say, or were there other units from other branches that did some construction work like the Seabees did?
They still, in some areas, had civilian contractors doing some of the work, but that was very few and far between later on in the Vietnam War. But the Air Force had a civil engineering team or a small civil engineer group that worked with them. The Army Corps of Engineers primarily did their work as stateside, looking at things, and were involved a little bit in some construction overseas, but it was probably the Navy Seabees that did most of the work there because they did work for the Army, the Navy, Air Force, the Marines, and even the Coast Guard had some ships over there along the coast or up the Mekong River, and we did some work sometimes for some of those people.
Yeah. Sorry, my curiosity is endless, so forgive me, but is there a big difference between, I mean, there must be a huge difference between building a road and building a runway.
Similar process. It's all level, and you want it to be kind of flat, not hilly, and up and down and all around. But it's the same process, and eventually they get paved. In Vietnam, we didn't have much paving of the airfields. They had sort of a marston matting that went down on top of it, where you could come in on sort of a metal grid to keep the plane's wheels from sinking in the dirt underneath there. But some of the larger ones, of course, we took over airfields that were owned by the Vietnamese when we moved there. It increased the length of them and the width of them and the parking aprons for them because of the aircraft that we brought in there, and the helicopters the same thing. So not much difference between constructing an airfield and a road. The roads, for the most part, though, we would put rock on them and tamp them down. In other areas, because of the heavy duty on them, we'd have to pave certain areas either with concrete or asphalt, so that it didn't get kind of worked away there as the big heavy vehicles, including tanks, rolled down those roads. But pretty much the same thing.
All right. Well, Bruce, I just want to say, I'm grateful for every Vietnam veteran who's willing to share any amount of history or personal experience with me. But you in particular, I've been trying to connect with you since fall of last year, and the reason we haven't connected until today is 100% my fault. And so here we are at the 11th hour, and I just appreciate you being willing to do this with me. I don't deserve it, and I'm aware of that. So thank you.
Well, we appreciate you and the individuals out there who are willing to talk about and help people understand what a CB is, what a CB has done, and probably what some of what they'll be doing in the future. But it's been a magnificent experience for me, and I thoroughly enjoyed each and every minute I had with the Navy Seabees. Some were a little more fun and civil than other times, but still, it's the people you work with and the memories you leave behind and the brotherhood you establish. We used to say in the Seabees, we went over as strangers, but we came back as brothers, and now we refer to each other, hey brother this, hey brother that, welcome home brother, because we got really no welcome home when we came back from Vietnam. I came back a couple times. I was met by people from the battalion and their wives and associates and stuff like that. And it was kind of fun. We had some little parades we marched in. But the third time I came back from Vietnam, I met the ugly American people that you read about who speak harshly to and spit on individuals. Coming back my third time through Travis Air Force Base, I went down to the Greyhound bus terminal in San Francisco to catch a bus to L.A. So I could get back to Portland, maybe just north of L.A. And outside there were a couple of hippies, long hair, ugly-looking, trashy-looking people walked up, started yelling and giving us the single-digit fingers and cussing at us and calling us baby killers and stuff like that. One of them actually walked up and spit on me, spit on my shirt and my shoe, and it was all I could do to not to retaliate. But I said, nah, what the heck? So the other guy and I, who was walking beside me, we in the terminal, walked in, and I cleaned my boot and my shirt a little bit, and we got on a bus headed down to Greyhound bus headed down to Los Angeles. Ended up back in Portland, and got my wife there. By the way, I've been married on that tour in Hawaii and went back on R&R, got married from Quang Tri in '68. So met her, packed up our bags, and headed off to Norfolk to start my next tour of duty. So that's a little bit about coming home, being welcomed home by your partners and families, and the other times some of those came back and weren't treated very well at all.
Yeah, I've heard that story more times than I care to remember. The good news is that today, whether people support the war or not, they don't treat our service members that way. And I think the reason they don't is because you guys, your generation, made sure that changed, that didn't happen again.
So true. And every now and then I see people out there, even young kids, will come up and shake my hand and say, welcome home, thanks for your service. And it means a lot today. It would have meant a lot 55 years ago, but it means a lot today that people today are welcoming these young heroes home from their wartime efforts and travels overseas. And I'm really happy to see that. God bless America.